Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, Coach Nicole from @formerfatgirl and myself are reviewing a video by myprotein from a guy called Richard Kerwan, and the video title is How to Spot Nutrition Red Flags. Nutritionist explains.
The internet is full of nutrition, but you can learn to spot all that nutrition crap. Here are my top 9 red flags. Look.
Worst editing ever.
How's it going, guys? My name's Richard Kerwan, and today I'm going to do something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I'm going to share some tips that you can use to spot nutrition claims online so you don't fall for all the nutri-nonsense that fills the internet. If you've watched a few of my videos, you'll know that I try to help you understand how nutrition science works, so you'll have a better understanding of how food and diet can affect your body. To do that, I use science-based information. Not just from 1 or 2 studies, but based on the totality of all the scientific evidence we have available. The problem is that on the internet, I see so many examples of nutrition misinformation, which is when someone gets something wrong, and disinformation, which is when someone intentionally makes something up or lies every single day. At best, this bad information confuses people. And I'm sure many of you have been confused by different messages you've heard about nutrition. At worst, it could be downright dangerous information that could affect someone's health very badly. So, without further ado, here are a few red flags to watch out for. Red flag.
Excellent. What do you think so far then? I feel it sounds quite convincing so far. I'm definitely in belief that he's going to provide a good talk on it.
Oh, the editing is really cheesy and super annoying. But yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. It's an absolute dumpster fire. And unless you know, even people who are trained in this space, like me, you, and others, I mean, I personally sometimes don't know what to believe because it's very, very conflicting, everything you find on the internet. So it's very hard to discern truth and false. So yeah, he's not wrong so far.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Let's see what red flag number 1 is.
Flag number 1. They love using the word toxin. Why is that a problem? Well, in nutrition, biochemistry, and toxicology, there's a phrase: the dose makes the poison. You see, many foods can contain substances that in isolated, high amounts could be dangerous, but in amounts normally found in food may have no harmful effects at all, or might even be beneficial. Some toxins in the amounts found normally in food actually help to strengthen your body and make you healthier. This is a process called hormesis, and it's one of the reasons vegetables are so beneficial for health. You hear this a lot with some people saying plants are toxic, for example. If that's the case, why do some of the healthiest diets on earth, as determined by science, contain huge amounts of plants? It doesn't make sense because toxins in edible plants aren't bad for us. Red flag number 2.
There we go. So I think he's talking there about anti-nutrients. Plant anti-nutrients, so he's putting up pictures of spinach and kale smoothies and saying they're apparently good for us. That's what's indicated, at least from the video, as far as I could tell. I think there's certainly a level of hormesis we can get from different foods, but it's when that tipping point boils over. And a lot of these plant foods, one of the biggest toxins in them, I'm sure you might agree, is glucose or fructose as well. You know, fructose isn't going to kill us immediately, you know, but it's a slow burning toxin. Eventually it can cause some damage. What do you say towards that? And do you think there's a true toxicity spectrum?
I personally believe that, yeah, the dose is, I guess, when it comes to how it affects humans, yeah. I think that's where the dose makes the poison. But the problem is what is recommended is 6 to 8 servings of these things, which do have a high level of toxins. Most people who follow a plant-based diet eat a crap ton of spinach, and that has a crap ton, which is a scientific metric, a crap ton of oxalates. So I've personally had clients who had kidney stones because she was plant-based when she came to me. Now she's not, but she ate a ton of spinach and that affected her health. But I think if you eat like a handful of spinach, here and there, I don't think that's going to cause damage or issues. It comes when you eat and them in abundance. That's where things start to build up. And that's the same with glucose. If you have 300 grams of carbs like Saladino in the form of glucose and fructose, that level is toxic to the human body. Our bloodstream can only handle a certain amount of glucose at one time. Anything in excess of that outside of being stored at some point does cause a lot of issues, inflammatory markers and such. So I think having a handful of berries or a handful of XYZ every once in a while or once a day isn't going to break the bank. The problem is most people don't do that. Most people eat those things in abundance, and that's where I agree that the dose makes the poison.
I think that the best hormesis we can do is things we can do in our environment. So perhaps we don't, jump in a pile of dust, but maybe we go outside where it's a little bit cold sometimes. Perhaps we go in a sauna, we sweat a little bit, we do some exercise. I think that's a good enough stressor. I think probably with the diet is we have to excrete it. And like you said, a handful of berries here and there, a few nuts, it's not going to kill you. No, of course not. But, almonds, for example, something like 5 to 8 almonds contains a toxic level of oxalate. Our bodies have to excrete that. It's a stressful process. I think the toxic amount in terms of what can be absorbed by the body maximal is about 30 to 50 milligrams per day. So when someone's eating, a handful of almonds, a handful of cashew nuts, a handful of spinach, over time that's going to seriously add up. I think a lot of times these toxins aren't quite what people think they are. I think fiber is a toxin in and of itself. I know it's anecdotes, and I know this guy's going to go to it a little bit later in the video, but anecdotes are worth something. And I see a lot of people out there reducing the fiber intake in their diet and feeling much better for it in terms of their digestive system. But we'll go to red flag number 2.
They use anecdotes instead of evidence. Anecdotes are interesting stories from real people, but the plural of anecdote isn't evidence. Personal stories about the effects of diet, whether they're positive or negative, can and do have powerful effects on people's perceptions of that diet. You're more likely to follow a diet if you hear about someone who might have had a similar problem to you and then tried out some diet and had loads of success with it. But just because one person experienced an effect doesn't mean others will. That's why we do nutrition science research. And a real nutritionist knows that scientific evidence based on multiple well-designed studies and with lots of participants is much more reliable than an anecdote, more reliable than a story. Red flag number 3.
What do you think towards that then? Anecdotes?
A lot. So he's talking about anecdotes don't matter, right? If you're looking at the studies, well-structured studies that are out there, they're all anecdotes. They're similar to me having my clients keep a food log. I'm relying on them telling me how they feel, how they're sleeping, what their stress levels are, and being honest about what they ate. Those are all anecdotal feedback. So that's what all these studies are, because you're not going to lock someone in a lab for decades and control their environment and control what they eat and draw blood and run all these labs and all this stuff. You're not going to do that. You're relying on their anecdotes, their feedback, which is anecdotes. So I don't think there is a well-structured studies when it comes to humans. They're largely on animals. And if you're going to discount my feedback saying I feel absolutely amazing, I feel better in my 40s than I ever did in my 20s and 30s, then you have to discount all these other epidemiological studies and all that, because it's the same type of feedback. It's just they're just giving that feedback to scientists. That's literally what the difference is. So I disagree with him when it comes to anecdotes, because that's, in my opinion, what all this garbage all these studies, that's what they are essentially at the end of the day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, a lot of times it's the same thing. He said a really good point at some point in this video already, which is, you know, a good nutritionist will look at the science that they do have and piece it together and see what makes sense. But he does very, very, very heavily contradict himself throughout nearly all videos. So here you hear him say, anecdotes aren't worth anything and studies are this, that and the other. But when you actually look at what he says in a lot of videos, he just pulls at these anecdotes and pulls at these not very well managed studies that are epidemiological, which are just pretty much weak anecdotes, you know. Yeah, we go to red flag, whatever it is, number 3.
They focus on the foods you need to avoid. Why is that an issue? Well, fear is a very powerful marketing tool, and it's easier to get people to change their diet by making them afraid of certain foods. So they just avoid them. Have you heard of people rattling on about how you have to avoid gluten or sugar or dairy or whatever because it's terrible for you? That's the kind of BS I'm talking about. Focusing on foods to avoid helps create a common enemy, which is another marketing strategy. Responsible nutritionists focus more on foods that are important to include in the diet, and this is called inclusive nutrition. Okay, red flag number 4.
What do you think about that then? The idea of avoiding certain foods.
So in my experience, nutritionist, registered dietitian, whatever the heck you want to call them, they don't focus on foods. So they don't demonize foods, which I promote food freedom. So to a very small degree, I agree with that. Very minute. The problem is the types of foods these nutritionists and registered dietitians promote is largely plant-based, and they don't talk about the potential health outcomes with consuming donuts, cookies, all these highly ultra-processed foods. They're very much moderation, all things in moderation. And we have an obesity, diabetes epidemic here in the United States and UK even, and all these other countries in Europe primarily who are following United States. We got in this position because we can't moderate. So to me, that is the pure definition of insanity. When your messaging doesn't change, you're still promoting moderation. You're still saying, sure, have one donut, have one cookie, and all these things. But that messaging is what got us in this predicament in the first place. So most people can't moderate. I think we have to change our messaging and change what we're doing to make a positive change. Donuts are bad. Ultra-processed foods are bad. Plant foods in abundance and eating them every meal and every day are bad long-term. Like, these things are not good long-term. So why are we moderating those foods? Why are we promoting moderation instead of telling people the truth about the potential health outcomes of having those foods? And then that person can make that decision on how they want to proceed. But that messaging, in my experience and what I've heard, no one ever talks about that. They're very much intuitive eating and moderation. And that's where people get into trouble. There are certain foods that should not be moderated because they are highly addictive and they're made that way on purpose. So I disagree with him here wholeheartedly with that messaging, because it's making our situation in the United States and most countries in Europe, it's making it worse.
That's beautifully well said. I couldn't agree more. I think, it certainly appeals to people, the idea of a balanced diet. Have little bits of this, that, and the other, and you'll be fine, sort of thing. Have good balance, this sort of thing. But the reality is, it just doesn't fall true to what our bodies do with different foods. Now, it'd be lovely to say, you can have donuts every other day and it's fine. But our biology does discriminate. Our biology does know what we've put in it. We can't escape that. We can't tell our body, oh, it's fine, it's just a donut, it's just got this much trans fat, this much sugar in it, blah, 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 this many artificial God knows what. But our bodies know, gluten is we don't have much enzymes to break down gluten. That's why people don't eat it. The same thing with fiber. We don't have a great deal of cellulase, if any, really, to sort of break down fiber. Amylase, we have the highest concentration of amylase in our mouths to actually break down, glucose into our mouths. So it doesn't hold true when you think about it. I mean, if our bodies had such strong mechanisms to get rid of this toxic stuff, why would we need to try and include it? It seems counterintuitive, and we can look at the, Weight Watchers, Slimming World, what have you, only these groups which teach moderation, this is worth this many sins or points, what have you. But the reality is you see the same people in these sort of halls, in these community centres, week in, week out, not getting results. People do get results because they sort of make better food choices, but long term, they don't get great results. And that's what I see across the board. But what do you have to say about that, Nicole?
Yeah, that's the message I used to promote. And that's the message I lived by for so many years. And it just doesn't work. I had binge eating tendencies. I didn't have an off switch. So moderating those foods, it didn't do me any favors. But yeah, all of these diet companies market the same way because they're not addressing the root cause and the true problem, which is most people, when they are obese and they get to that level, type 2 diabetes, it's the same thing. There's an emotional component there. And they have this unhealthy relationship with food that, moderation and these things are not addressing. They're just appealing to people who want the quick fix and people who want that magic pill and they still want to consume those foods. That's similar to keto, and carnivore is slowly going in that direction too. If you think about it, keto ice cream and all these now, and carnivore treats and carnivore ice cream, like they're promoting those foods because people still want to indulge, and they think because it's carnivore ice cream or it's keto this, keto that it's healthy and it's beneficial. But if you just eat whole foods, that's all you have to do. But I feel like each way of eating does the same thing in a way, and this might be controversial, but I can see carnivore cheesecake, carnivore this, like they all, at the end of the day, are doing the same thing, just with different foods, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I have created recipes for these sort of videos, and I can completely see how someone that perhaps has binge eating issues, perhaps they're just got a really strong sweet tooth, they've not gone over it yet, that could be quite harmful to them. So a lot of the time I say, you don't need these things. These are more so for people that have a high energy demand, have a high food intake demand. They're useful in that instance, but the vast majority of people, they say eat whole foods in their unprocessed, unadulterated form, and that's going to serve someone best to get their nutritional needs throughout the day. But yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And I'm obviously a carnivore diet advocate. You're more on the fence of low carb, so coming from a slightly different angle here, which is quite useful. And we're both nutritionists. That shows we do have some pedigree and understanding of what we're talking about. We're not just people throwing stuff out the air,
Talk about the conspiracies to make people unhealthy. The use of conspiracy theories is another powerful marketing tool. It causes fear that they, whoever they are out to make the public unhealthy through their diet. This is also a way to make people fearful of nutrition research because they are behind all the corrupt research and conventional nutrition advice. There's never a real explanation of who they are or why they want to make everyone unhealthy, but it's a really common trope. As soon as someone starts talking about conspiracies, it's a good indication that anything else that they say about nutrition is probably going to be too. Red flag number 5.
Wow, on that talk, I think we all know who they are, and we can say who they are. I'll give you a clue because I don't want this video to be somehow hidden or censored or what have you. But they begin with R, and the second letter of their name is O. So if you look back historically, you can actually identify through their own preachings, their own writing sort of thing. They sort of said, we tried to buy out, these herb plant extracts sort of thing. We tried to make it into a profitable pill, a product, a pharmaceutical. They're often trying to emulate a medicine that we find in nature and find a way to profit from it. So yeah, they do exist, and they certainly are out to make a profit. I was just looking for an article today, and it was something to do with meat and be bad for you, something like that, or I don't know, something against anti-meat, the lady Becky, I remember her name was definitely a plant-based propagandist. And you looked for her profile, and she was part of a pharmaceutical sales representative firm, something like that. So of course she's going to promote plant-based, anti-cholesterol, lots of statins when she's part of that crew. She's profiteering from people's bad health outcomes. You can't sort of sell someone statins if they've not got something high in their blood. And I think at some point in some period of time, they sort of said, oh, this number in the blood test appears high. Maybe that's clogging people's arteries. We're not sure, but maybe we'll say it is. Let's find a way to lower it. Then let's find a way to make money out of it. So yes, I absolutely do believe it is a conspiracy. I don't think it's a theory. I'm definitely not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not someone that can conjure up these things myself. I'm just merely a nutritionist. So, but what's your take on red flag number 4, Nicole?
You don't wear a tinfoil hat, so.
Not that I know of, no.
So, yeah, he said a lot there. I actually recently did a video reacting to Dr. Westman. I actually really love Dr. Westman. I was going to do a standalone video, but, obviously he could talk about research better than I could. But Harvard, they did an article saying that red meat causes diabetes. And it's been well established that diabetes is glucose problem, right? So if you have diabetes, you manage your glucose response with insulin, but they treat it with exogenous insulin rather than changing their dang diet to like low carb, managing their carbs. So they is this medical establishment and big food. That's who's in charge of all these things. That's who funds all these crappy studies and all that. But if you really think about what they're promoting, I forget what video I watched. They said this video I watched, and I haven't really looked into it, but I believe it. So big food, Harvard, WHO, and all these organizations are promoting predominantly a plant-based diet. And then they're partnered with pharmacy that now treats, it's all like this vicious cycle. But the thing is, if you think about it, where do we get our anecdotes from? Say you get bit by a poisonous snake and you need an antidote to treat the poison. You're going to get those things from plants. They extract these toxins from plants to like kill toxins in the body or whatever to treat these things. But it's poisonous. You're injecting your body with poisons to get rid of these things. So why would you think it's good to ingest these same things? That's the same with like cancer treatment and stuff. You're essentially bombing the crap, biochemical warfaring the crap out of your body. So it's like, it just boggles my mind that these things are being promoted while at the same time you're treating these diseases, you're poisoning your body with those same things you're telling people to ingest. So I don't understand. You're giving your body poison to get rid of these things, to kill these things, because that's what you have to do. So why would you think it's healthy to eat these same things that you're intentionally poisoning your body with to get rid of these diseases and ailments? Like that does not make any sense to me whatsoever. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You touched on like diabetes, and this guy says he's a nutritionist, he's got a PhD, what have you, I don't know. Okay, if you're of that much stature, that much pedigree, you should rely on first principles. So you look up the definition, for example, of diabetes, and I bring this up because he's made videos about sugar, which I strongly disagree with. And he's sort of saying, well, you can still have it in moderation. Well, no. The quickest way to get rid of diabetes is stop what's causing it, stop eating what's causing it, which is sugar. It is defined as carbohydrate intolerance. excess blood glucose, too much sugar in the blood. You know, he acts like other people just saying mix matchy sort of things that don't make sense. It's like, well, no, just stop eating sugar, you know? So this guy does not hold himself to a high standard. I do not respect him. The reason why I say that is because I did actually offer twice for him to come on my channel or his channel, what have you, and do a a discussion, like a live debate sort of thing, and discuss all these things. So I actually went through different videos of his before, and I sort of said, point one where he said, here's my evidence, here's an explanation, made like 2 or 3 points in a couple of videos. And below it said, oh, hi, and Richie, if you read this, would you like to debate me in a video sometime? Under that, he gaslighted me and said, no, I don't like your attitude, or something like that. I'm like, I didn't have an attitude. You're the one putting out misinformation online. You can't stand up for what you're saying. You just put all this misinformation out online and think, oh, it's fine, I've got a PhD, and put this like fancy music behind it and all these little edits and stuff. But the reality is what he's saying isn't true. A lot of this stuff is not factual, and it's all to promote products, supplements, you know, all this sort of stuff. And he's obliged, of course, by the establishment that he's associated with to promote this stuff, this moderation, or they, you know.
I went to his channel when you said you wanted to react to these people, and I agree, because I used to take their supplements, admittedly, like back in the day, like many years ago. I would take myprotein because I thought they were healthy, you know, protein bars. I never looked at the sugars and all that stuff because of how these companies market their products. But I went through their videos, and they talk about binge eating, cravings, managing your hunger, and all these things. And it's such a broad range of topic. How can you possibly be an expert in that wide range of topics? Like you, Jonathan, are more of an expert than I am in the field of biochemistry, because you were trained specifically in that. I had just minimal training just in my, you know, nutrition education. We get like the basics. So I don't consider myself an expert in biochemistry. I know basics. I would consider myself a specialist in things like overcoming binge eating and emotional eating and obesity, because that's my personal experience, and I have specific training in those things. So I wouldn't dare to put out a video talking about insulin response and those sorts of things. So what gives them the right to talk about topics when it comes to binge eating and all these things? Because I guarantee you they never struggled with it, but because they have the clout, they consider themselves experts in all these other areas, and that's dangerous. Like people just need to stay in their lane, because that's where you get into trouble. And people they have millions of subs, they have a ton of subs, and people are going to listen to them because they have YouTube clout. So that's what I don't like in looking through their video library, are the wide range of topics that they talk about that they have no business talking about, because there's no way they could be an expert and super knowledgeable in every single one of those topics they talk about, because it's not just nutrition that they talk about.
Exactly, yeah. None of us are world experts at everything. Otherwise, we'd all be making millions. The thing is, this guy's got a PhD and thinks all of a sudden it makes him absolutely knowledgeable on every single topic. His physique is very mediocre. His presentation skills are excellent, much better than mine, so I don't flag him down for that. But I will say it doesn't mean the information is true. You know, like I said, the music playing in the background, the flashy stuff on the screen, it doesn't mean it's actually true. So you read for the comment section and say, oh, wow, this is so informative, Richie, thanks for your information. You watch the video like this, you think, these guys don't know what they're talking about. But if you go back through the whole video, I'm going to analyze red flag 5 and 6 in a minute, but we actually back up everything we say. And there's both of us doing it. So before you hit unlike, dislike, and leave a trashy comment, think twice. Actually listen to what we're saying. You can see what we're saying is actually true. That's my opinion anyway. Between the lines, yeah, I mean, you know, 8-minute videos, you can't go into too much detail on these sort of ones, but if you're going to make a video like this, you have to back it up, and I don't think he backs a lot of the points up. We'll make it to red flag 6 now anyway.
They deny all science except when it supports their beliefs. A good example of this is when some online nutrition guru claims that all nutrition science research is useless because of X, Y, or Z. But then, as soon as they find a study that supports their diet, they can't wait to shove it in people's face and scream, here's the proof for what they were saying all along. All nutrition research is useful because altogether, it helps bring us closer to an approximation of the truth. If someone says nutrition science is bogus when it doesn't support their views, but then jumps all over research that does support their views, then that person is simply cherry-picking research and doesn't understand how science works. Okay, red flag number 6.
That was a fun one to listen to. I understand why he says it. He kind of, I wouldn't say backtracks, but he kind of goes over it a bit better in the second part of that little segment. Initially, he sort of says people cherry pick their studies, and when science works for them, they say it, but if not, they don't say it. I agree. I do see that myself, but I mean, whenever I say something online in a video, I can back it up with science. There is hard science and there's weak science, which is why we use different terminology when we describe how we think something should be perceived. So we can say N15 isotope data shows this, because there's no other better measurement to identify what we were eating however many thousand years ago. But then I say, we might say, a high fiber intake is associated with this, that, and the other. Yeah, because there's association, but it doesn't mean it's hard science. But then in contrast to that, we do have hard science in an RCT where we can look at the fiber intake at varying different degrees, where the participants within that study, a lock-in study, actually had worse health outcomes when they had more fiber in their diet. So we understand there is levels to science. There is a hierarchy. That's why the terminology is important. Saying risk versus association is very, very key. And I think a lot of people get it wrong. I know he certainly gets it wrong in a lot of videos. But what do you say to that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this when you, Kim, and I were talking about studies that most people, myself included, I'm not a study expert. I was not trained in reading, dissecting, analyzing studies, nor was I trained in statistics. I actually failed statistics. So I am part of this until I self-educated myself a little bit by listening to people like you, Bart, and other folks. But most people don't have a high attention span, and they just read the headline and the conclusion. That's all they read. And researchers and scientists know this, so they'll do a study and they'll make the headline catchy that most times doesn't even match the outcome they were even trying to prove, and then they'll draw a conclusion that's different again than the conclusion they were trying to come to or prove. So it's very misleading, and I think researchers and scientists take advantage of that most people aren't going to read top to bottom of the study. They're just going to read the headline and conclusion, and they write their headlines and conclusions in that way to make people think the way they want them to think. So I think that's problem one. Problem two, yeah, I agree with you that I think there's a lot of cherry picking. I think, and I mentioned this also, that there's a lot of research, and I know there's varying levels of, the hierarchy of research and all that, but you can find flaws in pretty much any research. But I do see it in our community, the carnivore low-carb community, and then the other side of the aisle with the plant-based community, that if there's a saturated fat study that comes out, we're all over it. And then the same with the plant-based people. If they're like, plant-based diets decrease all-cause mortality, because that's the big thing, right? They take it and run with it. And I think there is a level of truth to what he says, that people do look for things. And I think that's human nature. Like, we want to be right, and we want what we're doing to be right. So I think there's a level of that. But I think if you bring it back to basic biology and how we're designed and how we absorb, digest, and break down nutrients, that has been well established. So if you just take a step back and bring it back to basics of human biology and physiology, then you would have an easier time debunking a lot of these studies. And that's how I started approaching things, is just bringing it back to basics, what we do know and what has been established, And what has been established is we should be eating a predominantly animal-based diet. It's the most bioavailable. It's where we get the most of our nutrients and the most in the correct currency, like K2, heme iron, all these things. So I think if you just think about what we do know and what has been well established, I think then you'll be able to read these studies in a different lens and be able to discern, truth and fiction type thing.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Move on to red flag number 6.
They use black and white thinking. Black and white thinking in nutrition is like when someone says, well, if meat is good, plants must be bad, or vice versa. Nutrition science isn't black and white. Just because a food may have a negative effect in one context doesn't mean it can't have a positive effect in another context, or in different amounts, or in different people. Take fiber, for example. Getting a high level of fiber in your diet can reduce your risk of being constipated, but...
Absolutely not. That gets the point I just made earlier. We literally only got one study out there, which is a lock-in study, which means it's causal. You can use the word risk in that kind of context. They found all the people in there with digestive distress actually had their symptomology reduced when they got their fiber intake as close to 0 grams as possible. Now, as that fiber intake increased, their constipation, digestive distress, symptoms actually, it got worse. So more grams of fiber did not equal reduced risk of constipation. So I don't know where he's pulled that from. But if you're fed often enough, you'll just believe it. So I don't know. You got anything to say on that point?
I mean, just one thing. He said, if meat is good, that means plants are bad. Plants might be bad or harmful in one area, but beneficial in another area. So you can't say that about meat, though. You can't say, I understand there are outliers that have issues digesting meat and stuff like that. I have come across people like that. Those are the minority, though. The vast majority of people have no issues. So I don't see any negatives with meat. I do see negatives in eating plants. Yes, I understand. I eat avocados and these things. I also don't eat those things in abundance, and I don't eat them every day. But the benefit of plants, I'm assuming he's talking about, is what I said earlier, is they use those plants as medicinally, like medicinal purposes, to treat disease. So they're literally poisoning our bodies to kill the disease. That's the benefit. The benefit of eating them, I don't understand. So I think he understands that eating plants in abundance is harmful. I'm assuming, reading between the lines, that's what he's getting at. But what is the benefit outside of what we use it for is to treat disease? Most of our medicine comes from plant extracts and stuff. So what are the benefits of ingesting plants outside of medicinal purposes?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's like, one step forward, one step back sort of thing. So you don't really get anywhere. But I think with a lot of plant foods, like you kind of said, is like, well, in actual fact, it's like 2 steps back when you're eating in its whole form. So, for example, in this video here, we can see in this clip, they've got a bowl of berries, granola, nuts, and I think maple syrup or something. So imagine in that bowl, there's like probably 100 grams of sugar, or carbohydrates if you attribute that into the account of it. But and also probably 10, 15 grams of fiber. I'm willing to bet it's probably almond milk or something as well. So if I list off all those ingredients, then compare that to, a steak or something, or a bowl of eggs, guaranteed that eggs will make someone feel better. They won't crash like an hour later, and they'll feel satiated and they'll, thrive. But this isn't true with these sort of foods. It's diminishing returns. And I think a lot of times people just want to justify sugar addiction. They just can't accept. There's not really there's a tolerability level to it all, but for some people, you'd be quite surprised. I know muscular people that just don't do well on any real amounts of sugar at all. We do know more sugar means more glycation, more inflammation, absolutely contraindicated to people with autoimmune disease. Then people, if they don't have it already, chances are if they're eating this for breakfast every day, they will have it at some point. the average American citizen is unwell. The average, overweight, obese, what have you, morbidly obese. I think there's a statistic out there. I can't be quoted on this because I don't know if it's absolutely true or accurate, but something like average American citizen over the age of 60 is on like 5 meds. That's absurd. 5.
And they have at least one chronic, 1 or 2 chronic ailments. Usually osteoporosis is one, heart disease is one. So they're on all these meds, but they also have at least one chronic ailment as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is also, I think these are all new diseases, really. I mean, you didn't have reports of people breaking their bones all the time like 1,000 years ago. And even further back than that, 20,000 years ago, you didn't often find people's broken bones unless they were in a fight. You could clearly see someone had their leg hacked off with an axe or a sharp object. But we can just look at the data we do have. We can look at the mechanisms we do have. And granted, they aren't absolutely true and perfect, but if we look at the epidemiology, so we do what he said at the start of the video, put the epidemiology with the mechanisms, then look around you with the anecdotes, you'll see, well, yeah, absolutely, people are following the dietary recommendations for the most part. More plant-based, less salt, less cholesterol, saturated fat, what have you. And people are generally getting sicker. The animal food intake is not increasing. It's gone down a lot. So it kind of tells me, okay, we've increased one thing, reduced the other, now we're more sick. So from an onlooker's perspective, it seems like certainly the plant-based diet is not being the most helpful for us as human beings. Okay, we'll move on to the next.
If you're not used to eating fiber and you suddenly switch to a high fiber diet, you might get an upset stomach or gas. Does that mean that fiber is bad for you? No.
Yes.
Saying foods are either good or bad in any amount without giving context is just lazy thinking and promotes bad relationships with food. Nutrition isn't black and white, and your food choices don't have to be either. Red flag number 7. They promote ancestral diets. Just because our ancestors ate something doesn't mean it benefited their long-term health. Our ancestors only needed to live long enough to reproduce, which means living a long life into their 80s or 90s wasn't that important. We also don't know in detail what our ancestors ate. That's why I said ancestral diets in air quotes. We just don't know for sure. You also need to think about which ancestors are we talking about? From which geographical location? And from what point in time? Where do we draw that evolutionary line and why? We don't need to know how our ancestors ate them because we have plenty of real scientific evidence from now that tells us what types of diets can be beneficial. Red flag number 8. They base their...
Wow, what do you think about that ancestral diets? We don't know where or how much or what we ate historically, apparently.
So I'm not an archaeological expert or whatever. I do like me some Indiana Jones, but I think it's been well established from what I've read, because I looked into this a little bit, that we ate predominantly animal foods. And of course we ate from the land and all that stuff. And I believe women ate more, the berries, like the carbs and stuff, than the men. But understanding that agriculture is different, like eating from the land is different now than back then. But absolutely evolution plays a part. Why do you think we have like 2 times, 10 times, whatever amylase? Because we've increased our carbs. So and we need the excess amylase to break down all the exogenous carbohydrates we're eating. So how we eat, throughout history, also evolves our genes, our hormones, our digestive enzymes, and things like that. So of course, evolution matters because that depicts how we evolve and how we break down, absorb, and digest food. So that's one thing about evolution. But when it comes to eating from the land, yeah, we ate different things. Like my family on my dad's side is from Italy, so we ate
pasta
and seafood and things like that. And the Inuits and whatever ate like blubber and like whale meat and all that stuff. So yeah, not everyone ate ruminant animals and game meat. They ate a variety of animal foods, but it was animal food, seafood, ruminant animals and things like that. That's what they hunted and that's what they ate. I don't believe we ate only beef because we didn't. But they ate an abundance of animal foods to include fish. And that's why they didn't have all these diseases, because they were eating a varied diet, a well-balanced animal-based diet, getting a variety of nutrients from a variety of different foods. And that's personally where I believe, that's why I mix up my meat and all that stuff, because I believe that variety is good, but I don't understand how he doesn't think, being a nutrition expert with a PhD, that evolution doesn't matter when it comes to of how we've evolved to eat. If you just, amylase is just like what popped in my head first, because we have an absorbent amount of amylase than we did hundreds of thousands of years ago because of how we eat now. So we have evolved in a way to be able to handle the types of foods we're eating now. So how can you say evolution doesn't matter?
Yeah, exactly. And the real point I want to add to that is about the size of our brains. Our brains have shrunk over the last few thousand years. Now, granted, yes, we are more intelligent like right now than we were 10,000 years ago in probably most cases, I imagine. But saying that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's because our brains are any better. Like, if we think about it logically, we've had a larger population. There's more genetic spread. There's more people with more skills, talents, abilities than there were 10, 20,000 years ago. So we had a better opportunity to collaborate. We had a larger, deep gene pool to pull from. So the chances of us having, better technology as time went on, right now we're recording on a computer screen through some online software, talking to each other from, 3,500, 4,000 miles away or something. We're talking about a video that was made by a guy 6 to 8 months ago. It's because of technology. That's why we live so long now. But it doesn't mean we're living any better. We're still dying of these really godforsaken diseases that would otherwise not be here unless we ate it. Unless we've been eating the grain, high sugar, high fructose, high seed nut diet that we're currently on. But I certainly believe that there's definitely levels to it in terms of our diet. Like you said. Yeah, we probably thrived on a few select animal foods and a few different bits here and there just to sustain ourselves. But our genetic makeup, our biology has not changed that much in that period of time. We haven't grown 2 stomachs to deal with more fiber intake and larger volumes of food. If we look at the actual volume or capacity of our stomach, it's like 400 milliliters or something. Now try eating 400 milliliters worth of, kale, spinach, smoothies, just to get your nutrition requirements of the day. You're going to be full all day long and all night long. You're going to feel like crap. You're just not going to do it from eating just sugar alone. So I'd say absolutely yes, we need more nutrient dense foods, like the ones you outlined. I think that's very well said. I'm surprised there's actually 8 flags on this one, but we're going to go to the next one. I thought they were sticks. I messed that one up. Okay.
Their advice on mechanistic or animal research alone. Mechanistic research in nutrition is often carried out in test tubes or petri dishes using cell lines and isolated nutrients, not in real humans or with real foods. Animal research is carried out, obviously enough, on animals like mice, rats, pigs, or monkeys, not on humans. Mechanistic and animal research is absolutely essential for developing nutrition science because it teaches us the underlying mechanisms of how nutrients might behave. But just because something happens in cell culture or in animal models doesn't mean that it will happen in humans when they eat a certain food. And we have plenty of human research that doesn't match up with mechanistic or animal studies. This is why research in humans, looking at real outcomes like weight loss or heart disease, is much more reliable and interpretable than mechanistic and animal research. Red flag number 9. They focus on...
I don't have much to complain about that. I think the circadian kind of clock comes into it a lot, obviously, with, mice versus humans. We don't really sleep during the day. So I think that does come into it, and I think he's certainly right about that. So I've got nothing really to contend with at that point of view. Got anything to say?
Yeah. Me neither, outside of talking about human studies and all that stuff. Again, I forget exactly what he said, but I immediately went to anecdotes. Is that what you're saying? Anecdotes? But yeah, I agree. And the animals that we're researching on doesn't match our digestive system and all that in our biology. So it's how much can you really garner from those studies anyway? I think there was a cat study too, even. So, I mean, how much can you really garner from those studies anyway, as it pertains to humans?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to the next flag, which is caught me by surprise.
One best diet for everyone. Have you ever heard someone go on and on about their new diet and how it's supposed to fix everything in their life, from helping them to lose weight to curing their broken leg and saving them from depression? They probably love it so much that they tell everyone to follow it, right? The thing is, people are very similar, but what works for one person may not always work for others. Despite our similarities, everyone is a unique, special snowflake. Assuming that there is one best universal diet for everyone is very dangerous thinking. That's the problem with following any diet that has a name. It locks you into some stupid, made-up rules that may not be right for you. Following your own diet based on the specific foods that help you feel best and stay healthy is probably the best diet of all for you. So after all that, I really hope these...
What do you think about that? There's no optimal, perfect human diet for all of us.
I mean, the reason why individuality comes into play is because once we're born and we're weaned off breast milk, we're put onto essentially a high carb diet. So over time, over these years, we develop autoimmune issues and we develop all these problems to where, you know, one thing may not work for another. Like I can have blueberries and be fine. I know you say you can't. But I think the problem is just that if we're weaned off breast milk and then we're then transitioned to animal foods, we won't have as much individuality because we would all have the same, I don't want to say genes, but we will all have the same
starting point.
Yeah. And we won't have these autoimmune issues, or will be less likely to have these autoimmune issues and all these inflammatory markers and stuff. So I think that's where the problem is that we're all transitioned. I don't want to say all, but most people are transitioned to a high carb diet, and then over time develop these issues that they now have to heal. And then most people reintroduce some carbs in, but that's where the problem is. And then people develop these addictions and these reliance on these carb sources. So I think that's the problem. I think if we all have the same starting point, we won't have these problems and we won't have as much individuality as we do now. The individuality is because of the damage, the metabolic damage that we've done to our bodies from off breast milk till whatever starting point they're going from. That's immediately what I thought of when I heard him talking about this.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I probably wouldn't have thought of that first, but now you mention it, I probably should have done. My kind of take on it was, if I look at, say, you know, we've all probably seen those charts where you got like a dog, a wolf, a pig, sheep, cows on the other end sort of thing. Now it goes from sort of like a carnivorous animal to a more herbivorous animal. If I look at my digestive system, which we do know what it is, we know roughly the approximate length of it. We know how many chambers we have in our stomach. We know length of our intestines. We know the enzymes we can produce, the enzymes we cannot produce. We know the concentrations of those different enzymes. We can sort of say, yeah, we're pretty much in line with an animal like a dog or a wolf. Now we have some tolerability, yes, because of selective adaptation pressures we've had over the past few thousand years. But what I'm kind of thinking is, if we're to feed our current diet to our very, very, very late ancestors, I don't know, 200,000 years ago or something, they would have very deleterious health outcomes. We probably wouldn't have made it to this point. Now we can look at our mortality rate We're dying quite young when we're following these plant-based diets. I think we're only just holding on like clutches to straws sort of thing. So if we look at, say, the populations in Africa, for example, the first place comes to mind. They eat a very plant-based diet. It's cheap, affordable, lots of grains, lots of imports, things like that. They have access to this food, but it's sustaining them, but they're not living very long at all. And that's why that population of people, they have to have like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children, because by having more offspring, they've got more genetic pool, more chances that at least one of them will be successful and thrive somewhat and have offspring. So that's kind of why I'm thinking of more carnivorous. Our stomach pH, 1.5 to 2. It's very tightly regulated. It's meant to be that. We can look at Pottinger's cats, that study. The cats that were fed a proper diet with taurine, which is in animal foods, thrived a lot better than those which did not have it. They're a carnivorous animal. They can't live without that sort of nutrient. We all have like these genetic polymorphisms, which mean we can have a bit more of this, a bit more of that. But I'd say, historically, probably, I would say hypercarnivore at the very least. So at least 70% carnivorous animal foods. Then the last 30% can be made up of a bit of this here and there, depending on your tolerability. My partner, Sophie, she can tolerate foods a lot better than I can. If I look at her ancestral heritage, it's slightly different to mine. Mine's very Scandinavian. We wouldn't have had bananas and tropical fruits and things like some people would, perhaps in the equatorial line. So I can't tolerate these foods as well. I've not had those genetic adaptation pressures. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say on that one, unless you wanted to wrap it up with anything else to conclude.
Yeah, I agree with the hyper carnivore thing. Absolutely. I think that's been pretty much established. And actually, Bart K is actually like changing. I saw a video he did recently, and I noticed that he's changed his message a little bit, where he's now, when he talks about exogenous carbohydrates, he's now saying optimals, below 50. And I'm like, perfect, because that's where I'm coming from. That's still within the keto realm. But one last note on the plant-based thing that came to mind as you were talking about Africa is India. So it has one of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes as well. And they're plant-based. They eat a lot of curries. And I had a doctor refer a client to me who's Indian, because they all eat pretty much the same food. And he had heart disease. He was having blockages. One of his arteries was blocked. And he was having all these issues. But if you look at what people from India eat, it's a plant-based diet. It's just their plant-based diet doesn't look like what it looks like here. It's mostly curries and beans and tofu and things like that. So if you just look at countries who are heavily plant-based and just look at their health, and you'll start to see like India is one of the worst actually when it comes to that, and they're a plant-based diet. United States, I think why we're in the predicament we're in, and UK and certain countries in Europe are actually following suit now, is because we're not eating whole foods. We're eating ultra processed, highly processed foods with a ton of sugar, a ton of added sugar, high fructose corn syrup, which they're just calling other names just to get through the FDA and all that stuff, the regulations. But like those things are still being added to our foods. That's just our next added layer of jackery. I don't want to say the F word, but it's, plant-based, but I think, which still causes issues, but I think where we come into more problems is we're doing plant-based, plus we're doing the ultra-processed stuff like the fake meats and all this garbage, which has a laundry list of ingredients. I think that's where a lot of our problems come into play, is these big food companies with cornflakes and all these things. It's a multifaceted thing. It's not just plant-based, but if you look at plant-based countries, they have the same ailments as we do.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one thing I didn't really note about that video was this guy, he's talking in it. the company MyProtein, they do produce vegan supplements, vegetarian sort of plant-based stuff. So if he is to say, yeah, I think a carnivore animal-based diet is a bit better, even 51% better, he's automatically probably lost his job. Because then he's not going to sell as much as those products for that company. But I'd have to contend with that and say, as a nutritionist, you've got an ethical obligation to offer the best advice. So that's why I cannot ethically say to someone to follow a plant-based diet. And I can't agree with someone when they say to me they feel great on it. It's probably because of what you just said, Nicole. They're omitting a lot of the ultra-processed foods, which is it's good, and there's certainly levels to it. I know you mentioned about Professor Bart K saying about 50 grams of carbs per day or less. I think his messaging is pretty concise. We know, well, him and I kind of know, or we believe that 0 grams of carbohydrates is optimal, but you also have to sustain that. Now, if you're then saying, okay, I'm going to eat something a bit dodgy every weekend, maybe you're going to have a salad or I don't know, whatever, then that's going to really throw your digestive system off. So that's why he gives you that bracket to say everything below this is pretty safe. Once you start going beyond that, and especially if you're a female, a light woman, maybe someone that's watching this doesn't do resistance training, that's when that 50 grams plus starts to play a bigger player in terms of implicated towards negative health outcomes. But I kind of agree now, Yeah. Yeah, of course, he feels below 50 is a good amount. But I kind of feel the same in a way. I'm in that below 50, you're kind of looking at, a decent level of ketosis for a good part of the day, probably helpful. But again, there's a satisfaction you kind of have with, I get to have, in Bart K, in your case, a bowl of berries here and there. Okay, fair enough. You enjoy that. That makes you feel better. I think there's a quality of life element that people often ignore. So in principle, in biological terms, in physiology, yes, 0 grams of carbohydrates is helpful. But then people, they don't feel right in it sometimes because they perhaps can't adapt. Maybe they're so far along in their health journey, they're 60, 70 years old, they just can't bring their body to go that deep in the diet, which is, understandable and fair enough. But that's a good point you brought up, because it means this made it more fulfilling and, I don't know what the word is, more interesting conversation.
Yeah. No, it was
Absolutely
good, and I don't think this was controversial at all.
Just remember to hit like that. And don't put nasty comments on my channel, otherwise you'll be blocked. All Nicole's. All right. Do you have anything, any final words to say, Nicole?
No, just, thanks for collabing with me. I always love our chats. And I think this was the first video where I didn't say anything I don't believe controversial. I think we were pretty fair and kind of approached it with our experiences and just our knowledge from work in the industry. So I think, we did our best to be fair and provide good value. So I think it was good.
Excellent. My pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.